In a moment, the silence of the evening promenade will crack as if someone snapped the air itself in half. The hill road above the harbor was almost deserted. A narrow lane of wet asphalt clung to the slope, catching scraps of neon from below. Bruce and Linda walked side by side along the concrete edge, just wide enough for two. Her heels clicked in a rhythm. His worn shoes moved quietly beside them. Far below, Hong Kong sounded distant. A tram bell, a horn, a thread of laughter. She was laughing about the waiter who had bowed so low over the bill he nearly hid behind it. Her laughter was soft and ordinary. Bruce smiled, but his jaw still carried the studio meeting from an hour ago. Polite talk, a careful, perhaps later. The sense of not fitting into a shape someone else had drawn. He breathed out, letting that fall away. Out here, there was only the damp road, the sea air, Linda's hand brushing his sleeve. Then he heard the engines. At first, a single note, far down the slope. Then another, a third. The sounds locked into a rising growl that climbed straight toward them. No easing, no tiny pauses of shifting gears, just approach. The skin on the back of his neck cooled. Ahead, white light began to jump along the wall and closed shop fronts. Several beams close together jerked in the same rhythm. Motorcycles, running as a tight group. The space around them seemed to narrow. On the left, stained concrete. On the right, a low barrier, and beyond it, black water pricked with harbor lights. There was nowhere to move that wasn't wall or drop. Linda stopped in mid-word. Her fingers slid to his wrist and closed there. "Bruce, do you hear that?" "Yes?" He did not stop, but his stride shortened, his weight dropped a little lower. His breathing settled into a calm line. Instead of staring into the glare, he glanced at a dark window. In the glass, his profile floated beside a cluster of white smears climbing the hill. Distance, speed, wet road. 3, maybe 4 bikes. He knew this stretch, where the curb dipped, where water always stood. Tonight the sound came in sharper, the air slightly out of tune. Noise burst around the bend. The first motorcycle shot into view and braked sideways, stopping across the lane a few paces ahead. The front tire squealed against the wet, spray flecking Bruce's shoes. 2 more engines rose behind them and swung wide, and in the space of a heartbeat, the road closed in, front and back, around the 2 of them. Engines idling around them, the quiet road suddenly felt like a room with the door pushed shut. The nearest bike stood so close, Bruce could see droplets on the chrome fork. The rider's helmet turned, visor still down, gloved fingers drumming once on the brake lever. Behind, exhaust heat licked at Bruce's back. Linda's grip tightened on his wrist and then eased. She knew better than to cling when his body was starting to listen. An hour earlier, they'd stepped out of the studio's glass doors into the same night air. Inside, the executives had smiled too long. They had talked about market expectations, about staying within the formula. One of them, older, had said it gently, "You're difficult to place, Bruce." He had smiled in return because getting angry would only prove them right in their own minds. Now, on this strip of hillside asphalt, the words seemed absurdly far away. Yet they left a faint echo inside him. Not anger, just a decision not to bend. "I knew you were thinking about them," Linda murmured, low enough, as if finishing a conversation from earlier. He didn't answer, but she caught the flick of his eyes. "I'm here. Stay with me." The lead rider snapped his visor up. Not a reckless kid. A man in his 30s, lines sliced into the skin around his mouth, eyes rimmed with the red of someone who'd been awake too long. There was no thrill in them, only a tired insistence. "The road's closed," he said, voice flat, Cantonese rolling off his tongue with the casual tone of giving directions. Bruce let the words hang a second. The engines filled the gaps between syllables. Another bike edged forward behind them, the rider's boot nudging the wet gravel. Turn back, that one added. Same language, same tone. Not a snarl, not a demand for wallets. A statement, like an instruction from a bored clerk. Bruce glanced over his shoulder. Metal and plastic hemmed them in, handlebars angled just so. No way to step past without brushing a throttle, without giving someone an excuse. It felt wrong, not like street trouble. Something rehearsed, but poorly. He started counting without thinking, front man with his weight low and centered, one to the right, shoulders stiff, knees pinched inward on the tank, one behind, helmet turned toward the leader rather than toward Bruce. Another further back, visor still down, almost hiding. The rider in the rear shifted his bike half a length backward, just enough to widen the space, then stopped himself. Bruce saw the hesitation in the quick twitch of his left foot. "We shouldn't be doing this," that movement said. Linda's voice barely moved the air. "Everything okay?" "For now," he answered in English, calm, the words carrying a different message. "Not yet. Don't react." The leader rolled his machine closer until the rubber of his front tire kissed Bruce's shoe. A small, deliberate contact, nothing anyone could complain about later. His eyes narrowed in studied boredom. Bruce didn't move his foot. The pressure of the tire gave him information, angle, balance, weight over the front wheel. One push, one sharp turn, and the bike would tip. From the side, near the wall, another visor flipped up. A younger face there, jaw clenched too tight, Adam's apple bobbing. He leaned toward the rider next to him and whispered, thinking, the engine noise would hide it. It didn't. "That's him," the younger man breathed. "The one they talk about." The words slid through the fumes and landed like a small stone in still water. So they did know who he was. He saw Linda catch that line too. Her eyes changed, not with fear, but with a quick calculation. This wasn't random. This had been aimed. The sound of the engines bounced off the concrete on both sides, building a pressure that had nothing to do with volume. It pressed into Bruce's ribs, into the back of his neck. He let his attention widen. Not just men and machines, but where their feet touched the ground, who leaned forward ready to spring, who hung back because they were only here to be counted. He could feel that familiar state rising. Not heat, not rage, but the cool tightening of focus. A quiet storm, folding itself inward, waiting. The rev that followed was short and sharp, like someone slamming a drawer in a tiny kitchen. One of the riders on the flank twisted his wrist, engine barking once. The sound ricocheted off the walls and came back at them twice as hard. Linda drew in a breath, quick and shallow. Bruce felt it through the fabric of his sleeve more than he heard it. He shifted half a step forward, just enough that her shoulder lined up behind his. To anyone watching, it was a casual adjustment. To her, it was a shield. The leader eased his right foot off the peg and set it on the asphalt. The boot sole kissed a puddle. Water shivered around it. That simple touch of weight to the ground carried a message. Next move is coming from me. Behind him, another rider swung his leg over and dismounted. The bike rocked slightly on its suspension, then steadied. The man stood with knees bent, one hand still on the bar, eyes roaming up and down Bruce, as if measuring a piece of equipment he didn't fully understand. The lane seemed to tighten. The low wall on one side, the hill on the other, the ring of engines. Every metallic click, every shift of fabric sounded too loud. Even a belt buckle tapping against a gas tank ran through the air like a warning. Bruce raised his voice just enough to be heard over the idle. "We're just walking home," he said, calm, unhurried. "Let us through." He didn't pitch it as a request. It landed in the space between them like a small, solid object. His stance told a different story than his face. Shoulders loose, arms at his sides, but his weight had settled slightly toward the balls of his feet, ready to slide forward or sideways. His heels weren't rooted, they floated, ready to leave the ground with no wasted motion. Between him and the lead bike, maybe 2.5 feet. Close enough for a kick to land, close enough for a hand to flash out and grab. He didn't look into their eyes. Eyes lied, eyes bragged. He watched the rider's shoulders, hips, and knees. Those joints betrayed truth long before. A fist moved. The leader's left shoulder rolled a fraction. His hand dipped toward the throttle, an almost lazy gesture, but his left knee pressed inward, setting his weight firmly on that leg. Not trying to scare with noise, Bruce thought. Lining up for a strike. To his right, the dismounted rider licked his lips, shifting his feet heel to toe. He wasn't squared to Bruce. His toes pointed slightly away, as if one part of him had already decided to leave. "I said the road's closed," the leader repeated louder this time. His gloved fingers toyed with the grip, but his other hand hovered just above the clutch, tendons tight. From the pack, a voice came out strained. "We don't need this," one of them muttered, not quite under his breath. "He's not worth the trouble," another answered, more to convince himself than anyone else. "Boss wants it done. We do it." That crack in the tone told Bruce more than any words. This wasn't a random pack. There was pressure here, coming from somewhere above their pay grade, and not all of them were comfortable carrying it. Linda leaned just enough for her mouth to come close to his ear. Her tone was steady, but he heard the message beneath it. "Watch him," she whispered. "Right hand, it's shaking." Bruce didn't turn, but he absorbed that detail. A trembling hand could mean fear or anger or something chemical. Whatever it meant, it was instability. Unpredictable people made sloppy moves and desperate mistakes. The leader's jaw tightened. Instead of throwing a kick or even a punch, he jerked his upper body forward and reached out, fingers clawing for Bruce's collar, the kind of ugly grab that started a bar scuffle. Not a trained man's entry, a bully's first thought. Engines drummed, exhaust stung the back of Bruce's throat, and time thinned, each fraction of a second stretched, full of angles, lines, and choices. He felt the group behind the leader fade into the background. The real danger had narrowed to one point, one arm, one misjudged step. The moment where movement would finally replace noise had arrived. The grab came in ugly and fast, fingers clawing for cloth and bone. Bruce slid his front foot back and out, just enough to tilt his center off the line of attack. The hand that shot toward his collar met only air and the faint drag of his shirt. At the same instant, his forearm rose in a short, cutting arc. Not a swing, not a showy block, a precise wedge that met the rider's wrist and shaved it sideways. The man's own momentum carried his arm past its target, his shoulder tipping forward. Bruce felt tendons under his skin for less than a heartbeat. Then, contact was gone. He was already moving. His weight dropped an inch. Hips turned a fraction. From that coiled center, his fist drove forward in a compact line no longer than the width of his own shoulder. Knuckles buried themselves just under the breastbone, high in the soft center of the chest. To anyone watching from the wall, it might have looked like a nudge. Inside the man's body, it was an earthquake. Air tore out of the rider with a sound more animal than human. His mouth opened, but no shout followed, only a ragged gasp. His knees buckled as if the ground had jerked upward. One hand clawed at Bruce's sleeve, not in attack now, but in search of anything solid. Bruce stepped aside, letting him sink. The man crashed down on one knee between the bikes, gloves scraping wet pavement. For a second, nothing moved. The machines still vibrated around them, but the growl of combustion turned thin under the weight of what no one had quite seen. Eyes darted from the kneeling leader to Bruce's relaxed arm, trying to connect cause and effect. There was no big swing to remember, no dramatic leap, only a before and an after. "God!" someone near the back breathed. "It really is him." The ring of riders softened, a few of them edging their machines a hand's width away without meaning to. It wasn't fear in their faces yet, more a sober recalculation. Whatever story they'd been told about this man had just acquired proof. Linda let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her hand was still near Bruce's elbow, but she no longer needed it for balance. One of the younger bikers, the one whose visor had gone up earlier, swung his leg off his machine and hurried forward 2 steps, stopping short of Bruce like a boy approaching a teacher. He jerked his chin at the man on his knee. He said you thought too much of yourself, wanted to test you, make a point. The words sounded thin now, ridiculous in the damp night air. The leader coughed, a dry, painful sound. Sweat stood out on his forehead despite the cool breeze. He lifted his head with effort, eyes finding Bruce's face. There was no hatred there, only stunned comprehension and something close to shame. "You could have broken me," he rasped. "Ribs, spine, you had it. Why didn't you finish?" The question hung heavier than the exhaust. Bruce studied him for a moment, taking in the tremor in his hands, the brief flicker of fear that had flashed before he lunged. Then he spoke quietly, each word steady enough to carry past the idling motors. "Real strength isn't what you take from a man," he said. "It's what you choose to leave inside him when you can take everything." The younger rider swallowed hard, eyes dropping. The others looked away, as if that line had landed in places they'd spent years avoiding. For a few seconds, the only sounds were uneven breathing and the muted pulse of engines slipping back toward idle. The night beyond the hill waited, lights on the water winking indifferently. Bruce stepped back half a pace, giving the man on his knee room to rise if he wished. "Move your bikes," he added, not harshly. "Go home. Think about who asked you to do this and why you listened." Something in his tone left little space for argument. One by one, clutches engaged, the circle loosened, machines rolled aside, parting the narrow road. As they did, the riders kept stealing looks at him, not with the gaze men give a target, but the wary respect reserved for someone who had just redrawn the border between courage and folly. Linda fell into step beside him as they started forward again. The gap between the motorcycles felt like a corridor back to ordinary life. Behind them, the leader stayed on one knee a moment longer, hand pressed to his chest, breathing shallowly. Whatever he carried away from that hill, pain, bruises, the echo of a single precise impact, there was something else lodged there now as well. Not fear of being hit. Fear of what it meant that he hadn't been.